Sorry, not hearing anything.
No.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Half a day. Thank you all for being here. The Committee on Education, Air Transportation, and Statistics Research and Planning will now convene this virtual roundtable hearing. You are currently, okay, thank you for muting your audio. Today is July 31st, 2020, and it is currently 14:08 in the afternoon. For the records and in accordance with the open government law, public notices were sent out via email to all senators, stakeholders, and all main media broadcasting outlets on Tuesday, June 24, 2020, and the second notice on July 23rd, 2020. Notice of today's virtual roundtable hearing was also available on the Guam Legislature's website. Joining me today are representatives from the Guam Department of Education, the board, BBMR, OFB, and the Internal Auditing Agency, and also Mr. Vince Duenas from the EFSC. And we are waiting our parent representative, Carol Sanchez, to come online. Before we proceed with the virtual roundtable hearing, the legislature has general rules of conduct that must be followed. Carol, please mute. Thank you. All must abide by the rules of conduct and quality assurance standards. Please keep video on at all times and ensure you are in a room with little interruptions and adequate lighting, specifically to make sure the participant's face is visible at all times. The host of this hearing will mute participants until called upon by the chair. When called to speak, please ensure that you are unmuted and that you are speaking into the microphone. Members of the committee wishing to speak may indicate via the in-app feature box. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking and shall state their name for record-keeping purposes. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to character or the motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violations of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from the public hearing by the host. Today, I have called for this virtual roundtable hearing to provide the people of Guam with an insight of the functions and responsibilities achieved by the Education Financial Supervisory Commission. Pursuant to Public Law 30-164, the Education Financial Supervisory Commission, also known as the EFSC, was created to monitor the financial health of the Guam Department of Education. The commission is mandated to advise GDOE officials and the Guam Education Board to implement corrective measures in order to assure the public of the financial health for the upcoming school year, 2020 and 2021. We must disclose the findings and recommendations of EFSC. Because of the current pandemic, I wanted the public to be informed of how GDOE has implemented any cost savings due to school closure. We want to assure that the allotted funds to the department is managed, reviewed, and processed with integrity, especially during a pandemic situation. In addition, vendor payments of GDOE must discuss based on findings and recommendations of EFSC. In order to assure the readiness of GDOE's financial status for the upcoming school year, it is my intent to collaborate with EFSC, GDOE, and the Guam Education Board members. Today's virtual roundtable hearing will provide discussions on the Guam Department of Education's explanation of EFSC functions and processes, COVID-19 impacts to include cost savings due to school closures and vendor payments. I would like to acknowledge at this time Mr. Superintendent John Fernandez, and the Chairwoman of Education, Mrs. Maria Gutierrez. We have also a board member, Mark Mendiola, Mr. Bill Taitingthong from BBMR, Frank Cooperners, who is part of the internal audits in Guam Department of Education, and Mrs. Sunshin of GDOE, Vince Duenas, who is the member of EFSC, Carol Hinkle, who is also the member, Carol Hinkle Sanchez, who is also a member of EFSC, our parent representative. And I'd also like to thank OFB for their presence. Vanessa, thank you for being here. Mr. Superintendent, maybe we can start off with you. I believe you sent us a testimony of some sort with the request, and so perhaps we can start from there.
Well, if I could, I'm here as well and joined by the board and Vice Chair Mark Mendiola, who is also the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. May he go first, and then I can just follow as well.
Okay, sorry, Mark. I forgot to mention that you were the vice chair. Thank you. Go ahead.
May I proceed? Thank you, ma'am. For the Honorable Senator, Vice Speaker Telena Nelson, thank you for having this round table discussion. I think it's time that we have this open, lively discussion about a lot of the processes within the Department of Education. I did provide testimony, but I would like to read that testimony into the record. So if you allow me a moment. Honorable Telena C. Nelson, Vice Speaker and Chairwoman, Committee on Education, Air Transportation, Statistics, Research, and Planning. Hafide Vice Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the Educational Financial Supervisory Commission. I am Mark Mendiola, and I serve as the Vice Chairman of the Guam Education Board and the Chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. I come to you with testimony on behalf of the entire Guam Education Board. When the EFC was created a decade ago, it was created to address a Guam Department of Education that was clearly having challenges in managing its finances. The public law creating the EFC described a department that was unstable, unable to sustain services to students, and struggling to make the improvements necessary to move forward. At the time, the EFSC might have been a good idea in terms of bringing together the various budget and finance agencies together to assist the department and to provide a safety net for the department should it fail to show progress. Since then, the EFC's role has been primarily to monitor the financial condition of the department and to issue notices of warning to GDOE and GEB whenever there are signs of financial issues on the horizon. The EFSC findings then results in GDOE and GEB taking corrective actions to ensure that things are put back in order. As we discuss the role and function of the EFSC today, I would argue that it is no longer needed to ensure continued progress by GDOE. The GEB works closely with the superintendent, his Deputy of Finance and Administrative Services, and the budget and financial staff at GDOE to develop an annual budget, to prioritize spending, and to monitor the department's financial condition throughout the year on a monthly basis. When needed, the GEB, together with the superintendent and his team, and before the legislature to defend and explain our financial condition or to seek assistance in getting the resources needed to meet our mandates. Likewise, we are ready to assist with DOE, BDMR, and the governor when we see that the cash situation is tight and there is a risk that GDOE may see a cash shortfall. GDOE is stable now and has demonstrated significant progress since 2010 without the need for the EFSC to assume emergency supervisory authority to exercise any or other functions beyond issuing code designations. GDOE has been proud to report 7 consecutive clean audits, which are a testament to the efforts made by the department to identify and address address deficiencies so that we can account for the appropriate use of our resources. A stronger financial and administrative staff, a modern financial management system, and a well-trained internal audit team, and an annual review by external auditors and our public auditor have significantly contributed to our improvement, which now has placed us in a better position to demand that the U.S. Department of Education remove the special conditions placed on our federal education dollars and to remove the third-party fiduciary agent that is also in place. As we work to remove what we believe is unnecessary oversight by the third-party fiduciary agent, it goes hand in hand that we should be able to make the same argument about the EFSC. We already have strong working relationships with every agency represented on the EFSC, and I believe that it lessens the need to have the EFC stand as a separate bureaucratic unit of government. In summary, the EFSC was well intended at the time when GDOE was in need of such an assistance, as much assistance as it could get in order to improve its financial situation. However, over the past 10 years, things have changed, and GDOE has done what it has needed to do to demonstrate that it is no longer in need of the extraordinary help and vision by the EFSC statute. Just as we are requesting USAID to show its confidence in our progress as a department, so we come to you today to do the same by reconsidering the need for the EFSC and allowing GDOE to continue on its path of improvement unimpeded. Thank you for the opportunity. And I just would like to add, Madam Vice Speaker, it's a lot has transpired since 2010. I know that, we continue to be as transparent as possible. I know that the Department of Education, all our meetings are public. It invites and engages with our community, and it gives opportunity. You've also heard our calls. We had serious dialogues with you regarding our financial condition with the government, and we adjust accordingly. We understand that we are part of the government, and we need to work together. And I can honestly say, in the 3.5 years that I've been on the board, that we believe we have the structure in place necessary, that we don't need this continued oversight. I firmly believe that the U.S. Department of Education is ready to get us off of this high-risk status, which was the initial intent of the statute, was to, in response, legislative response, in addressing the high-risk status. So like Frank Brogan from USAID says, we're at the 1-yard line. We're about to punch this thing through. And I think it's time that also from our side to show that, we got that support from all levels of government, that we're ready to manage this appropriately moving forward and learn from our past mistakes. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Superintendent?
Hafaday, Vice Speaker, and all of those who are here to participate in this discussion. I want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Education Financial Supervisory Commission and its role and functions. The EFSC was created in 2010, as you mentioned, with the passage of Public Law 3164, which begins by stating the legislative intent for this new entity. And in short, the legislative intent appears to have been for the EFSC to address deficiencies within the Guam Department of Education related to high turnover at the leadership level, specifically the superintendent and deputy of finance, the school closures and disruptions of school services due to fiscal mismanagement or negligence, and a lack of public confidence in the school system. That was the intent then, and to me, that's what drove the EFSC's creation. To address these issues, the EFSC was established to monitor the financial health of GDOE through a financial status designation that would alert the department regarding any sign of fiscal trouble. And in response, DOE management and the Guam Education Board would develop and affirm a corrective action. Otherwise, meaning if there was a failure to move forward with a corrective action, the EFSC has the authority to assume supervisory control of certain financial functions in the department until the issue is addressed. The EFSC statute also appears to have contemplated other forms of assistance that could be provided to GDOE, including providing assistance and support with regard to the department's budget, expenditures, human resources, contracting, accounting, and information technology. Such functions under the statute would comprise the technical assistance and other supervisory assistance that were referenced as being helpful to GDOE. It was further envisioned that the EFSC would also assist GDOE in removing the high-risk designation placed on GDOE's federal education funds by the U.S. Department of Education since September 2003. The EFSC was established around the same time frame that U.S. DOE required the hiring of a third-party fiduciary agent to oversee federal funds. As you know, the EFSC consists of 5 voting members from DOA, BBMR, OFB, the public auditor, and a parent representative appointed by you as the chair of the Education Committee. The general accounting supervisor of DOA, the superintendent and deputy superintendent of finance are also non-voting members of the commission. The EFSC is chaired by the BBMR director with the OFB director as the vice chair, and the commission meets monthly, at least monthly, with a quorum of 3 required to conduct business. And as you recall, the failure of a member to attend an EFSC meeting resulted in a monetary fine in the absence, if their absence contributed to a lack of quorum. Public Law 3517, which you authored and was passed by the legislature, removed that fine as a consequence. Over the past 8 years, the EFSC has primarily functioned in its role as a monitor of GDOE's financial health, using its monthly meetings to determine code designations for the department. And if that code designation required a corrective action, there was a time frame for the management of DOE and the board to implement that corrective action plan. Primarily, the situations that have arisen where a corrective action has been needed has been related to issues arising from the management of cash received from DOA or from the delay or shortfall in cash received. Because of the legislature's actions in past years, the DOE budget is no longer subject to the governor's authority to set aside agency funds in reserve or to withhold allotments. Therefore, the issues that have come to the forefront during the EFSC's review have basically centered around cash flow, which of course is an issue that you're well aware of, that we have discussed numerous times before this committee, as well as the Committee on Appropriations during our budget review. In situations where cash flow has become a concern, I've usually taken the initiative, and it has been quite easy to just simply meet with the directors of BBMR and DOA, and as needed, the governor's office to address the release of cash on a timely basis, or to make the necessary adjustments when there is an expected shortfall. Those shortfalls, in large part, as you know, have usually been associated with either a shortfall in special revenue funds, such as the Territorial Education Facilities Fund, which has been a challenge for us over the past several years, and also when the entire government underwent the federal tax cuts and a revenue shortfall overall, where we had to make adjustments to adjust our budget downward to the tune of about $19 million. Beyond that, beyond its monitoring role, I have not sought the assistance of the EFSC in any of the other areas outlined in the statute. This is for two reasons. First, GDOE has made tremendous progress over the past 8 years by building internal capacity and working hard to address our financial management deficiencies. In 2012, we were able to, with American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds, purchase and operationalize a new, modernized, and user-friendly financial management system. We've taken the time to create and update standard operating procedures for our financial and administrative operations, and these have formed the basis for increased and regular employee training. We have built capacity in our business office, upgraded our procurement and property management divisions, and expanded our internal audit team to develop and improve internal controls. The result of our hard work has been evident in the fact that we have succeeded in achieving 7 consecutive clean audits for both financial statements and compliance with federal programs, reducing material weaknesses and question costs to 0 over this time frame. This progress, as you know, has helped us in our efforts to remove the special conditions placed on federal funds by US DOE, eliminating 3 of the special conditions in early 2019, and US Ed acknowledging in the summer of 2019 that we've met the requirements for the 4th special condition regarding timely single audits. We are working with US Ed on the removal of the 3 remaining conditions, including the requirement for a third-party fiduciary agent, and we hope to see further progress soon. The second reason why such assistance has not been requested is that GDOE recognizes that the agencies involved already have duties and responsibilities that must also be met in the course of their work with GDOE, but also with the rest of the government agencies. To implement the functions envisioned in the EFSC statute would require a much more intensive dedication of financial and human resources by these agencies to carry out. GDOE has its own procurement, property management, accounting, human resources, audit, and legal staff to conduct our responsibilities without having to tap on the limited resources of other agencies. And the employees in these divisions have demonstrated their abilities to carry out the improvements that have been evident over these past 8 years. Instead, I am grateful for the ongoing professional relationships between GDOE and BBMR, DOA, OFB, the public auditor, and the Legislature's Committee on Education at both the staff and principal levels that enable us to meet directly and to problem solve whenever problems arise. These ongoing and focused communications have helped with the department's improvements. And in fact, each of these agencies has demonstrated without a doubt sufficient partnership with and oversight over GDOE that there is no longer a need to require or force these agencies to have to meet, work together, communicate, and assist at the threat of being fined for non-attendance, as may have been the situation 10 years ago. I believe that it is an appropriate time for the legislature to reconsider the need for the EFSC. On behalf of our department employees I can attest that GDOE has stabilized in many key positions to ensure that financial management improvements continue. I can attest that fiscal mismanagement is no longer an issue in terms of requiring the closure of schools or disrupting services for students. It is no longer true that the public lacks confidence in our public school system. It has been my goal and mission to improve the performance of our department, to restore the professional reputations of our hardworking employees, and to elevate the stature of our agency as a forward-looking, responsible, and effective organization. For this reason, we were proud to have been chosen as the 2014 and the 2018 MAG Pro Agency of the Year for the government of Guam, as well as the top 3 finalists for Agency of the Decade. We were also voted by Everyday Pacific Daily News readers to be the best of 2018 government of Guam agencies, which is usually unheard of for a public school department. The conditions we were in 10 years ago no longer exist. At a time when we are making our case to the U.S. Ed Secretary and Assistant Secretary to remove the remaining conditions from GDOE and remove the third-party fiduciary, it's important that the governor of Guam be confident enough to stand behind us in this effort. Our governor, our legislature through the leadership of this committee, our congressman and our public auditor have all been united in that voice of support. For this reason, it is important that a similar message be considered when it comes to the EFSC, which is an extraordinary governmental entity put in place at a time when GDOE needed that intervention. The improvements made by GDOE over the past 8 years do not just apply to federal dollars, but instead have been applied agency-wide in terms of both local and federal resources. We are on the right path, and your continued support and confidence will get us to our destination. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before the committee today, and I stand ready to participate in today's discussion. So thank you, Vice Speaker, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Yes, Ms. Carol Sanchez, you are recognized.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I just wanted to point out several things. These 2 entities, the Guam Education Board and the EFSC, are 2 totally different entities that serve 2 totally different functions for the department. It wasn't just established just because the department had gone into a financial crisis or a financial situation that required it. But it resulted for several reasons, because the Department of Education receives a chunk of the government's money, and it goes to this agency, not like any other agency in the government where the budget is given to them as a chunk instead of allocated in special categories. And that's the biggest thing here is the fact that they have control over that money, and it can be used for whatever they want to use it for. They can move it around into whatever category they choose. Unlike other agencies who, if you don't have the money, you're going to have to ask the legislatures for the permission to either get that money moved, or you got to wait till the next budget year. So that makes us a little more responsible in the way we spend our money, because we know where it's at, and we know that if this is what we have to spend, this is all we're going to spend. And so there's 2 reasons. And I want to go back to the fact that the superintendent made the statement that GDOE has not sought the assistance of the EFSC. It's not about seeking the assistance of the EFSC. The EFSC has mandated duties and responsibilities under the law. So it isn't about us, it isn't about asking permission or seeking our assistance. That is the duty this commission was told to do. And it needs to be done, because that's what is provided under law. And if you look at the duties under title, I know it's under Title 17, Chapter 3, and it's sections, and I apologize because I just had it print, sections 3102.1, that's the duties of the Education Board. And then if you go into the EFSC, which is 3113, you can see that the roles are very, very different. You can see that the board serves a totally different function. And really, the FSC is somewhat an oversight, almost like a check and balance system in place because of the way the money is given to the department. And it's a big chunk of money. And the intentions of the FSC is to ensure that the spending of it is done in a manner that's very responsible, that's fiscally responsible. That you can see that it has nothing to do with what the board does. The board adopts policies, they adopt regulations, they adopt standards, they assist the school in adopting these things. We're overseeing, this is the budget, we're overseeing whether or not the budget complies with the amount of money they have, so they don't overspend. And I can tell you, with an $8 million IOU to many different vendors, you would think that they overspent somewhere. It isn't just the cost that came out of just popped out of something, because that was something that was approved by the board or whoever, and it was spent, and then we didn't pay them, and now we're at an $8 million debt, and it isn't going down. And I've been to these meetings. I haven't been in this commission for not even a year yet, but I see the amount continuing to rise, the total amount. And, those things are always questioned every time I go there, is because I'm curious as to how they plan to pay that down. And it's one thing to pay a current amount, but it's another thing to continue to add debt. And that's what's happening, is you're paying down some stuff and you start to pay the current, but the debt is rising in the middle, and it's going to rise, eventually move towards the right side. And we had that discussion at the last meeting. But yeah, they serve two different functions. It isn't about asking for help. They're mandated duties of this commission that has not been done. And for them to say that they've done something in 8 years and the commission now is interfering. No, it's funny, because we haven't even done anything different yet for us to interfere. Other than we go to these meetings and we haven't really gotten into any of the mandates that are required, because we're still kind of talking about finances all the time and not anything else that's listed here. Like, we haven't reviewed and approved any contracts over $1 million. None of that's come to our attention. We ask, and I feel like we shouldn't ask. I feel like it should be presented to us that this is what's going to be spent, because that's why we have non-voting members in the department that are part of this commission who fail to attend meetings. The superintendent is a non-voting member. The chief finance person is a non-voting member. Sometimes that person is serving both of the things. And I've asked in meetings to identify what they represent. So that's the reason they're a part of this commission, is because these things that are required by us to review, they should be able to present it to us. They should know, okay, we have a $1 million contract. We're going to submit it to you guys to review. It's not there. We ask. Just like the money they're getting from the CARES Act. I asked 2 meetings already in a row. How much are you getting? What are you going to do with it? And the person that should have answered it wasn't at the meeting. So there are 2 different roles, and I feel like they're not getting it. But these 2 entities are 2 different entities serving 2 different functions for the department. And if they feel like the EFSC shouldn't be here, then I think that their budget should be like every other government agency, and there should be special allocations for each category where they will be able to spend within their means. And they should know every school should be able to produce the amount of money they need. They should be able to produce the kind of equipment, the kind of repairs they need, and they should be able to tally a total amount per each school and combine it all. It's just like an agency, right? With 5 different divisions. Each division is going to be responsible for their own budget. And each of that budget, then the budget is going to be totaled together, which would equal the amount that agency needs. And each division is going to be expected to spend within their budget means. Otherwise, they're not going to have any money left. So, I mean, I heard what they say. I totally understand. I applaud them, because I know they are working hard and they're doing what they can. But they need to bear in mind that these two bodies are 2 different bodies that serve 2 different functions. And the board is probably overlapping on duties that they shouldn't even be doing. That's the other thing. I feel as though they're performing stuff that isn't even within their purview. And so that's really my position. And I brought it up during these meetings, but I'm going to leave it up to the legislatures, because they do have the ability under the law, under their mandates, to make recommendations to the legislatures for changes. That is really going to be the discretion of the legislatures. But I feel like if they feel that they have the ability to be responsible, but an $8 million debt is not gonna make anyone happy. That's more than what my agency gets, like 8 times more, maybe. But I'm just saying, if that's the case, then I think that they should be treated like every other government agency, and special allocations should be made. And yes, they can have the ability to transfer at their request and brought before the legislatures, just like some other agencies have.
Madam,
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Just a minute, Mark. What is this $8 million debt that we're talking about here?
Madam, if I could, Madam Vice Speaker, the $8 million she's referring to is in the is basically our accounts payable. You know, what the legislature typically asks when we come before you, and you look to determine what is owed to vendors. So as we've informed the Legislative Committee on Appropriation and Education, we typically run between the $7 to $10 million aging payables. Some of that is going to be within the 30 to 60-day range, and some of that is above there. And so there is a time period to pay down these payables. I wouldn't call them necessarily a debt, but they are owed to the vendors within a timely period. As we've informed the legislature over the last 2 or 3 years, one of the biggest constraints has been the reductions in the budget that have occurred and the shortfall in the funds that are meant to support these operations. So what happens when there is a cash shortfall in what is promised to the department? That's when you see the payables start to age, and then we have to work with our vendors on a spending plan to come current. So that's not a new issue. It's something that I think we've discussed numerous times. And I don't know that the EFSC necessarily would improve that. I think the issue of cash flow, better projections on our special education funds, and that type of discussion, which is already within the oversight of the purview of the executive and legislature, is sufficient to help us work through those issues. I don't need the EFSC to tell me that that's the same issue that we've been discussing with the legislature every time we meet. So I would just say that's something that the legislature and the executive branch are aware of and have already been helping us with. It's not, you don't need an EFSC to divulge that information.
Okay, I understand where both of you are coming from. We're having a similar situation as well with our charter schools, where they're being given appropriated sum. And so there are in some instances that, from our understanding and from the intent of the appropriated sum, that they would pay their vendors, but instead they have repurposed it for something else. And so, this is something that when you're running the agency, this is something that you have to discern upon. But my concern is the 90 days and over vendor payments that are due. And so, just how are we reconciling this moving forward?
So as you're well aware, in the budget cycle, what typically happens is that we have our general fund appropriations and we have our special revenues that come in mostly through TEF. What happens for the most part, if you look at our weekly release of cash and a weekly release of allotments and cash from BBMR and DOA, we typically are able to pay down our payroll and utilities first, with some remainder left over for vendors, and that's the way the structure of the cash flow is coming in, and that's something that we have worked with the legislature in the past to try to address the amount of exposure that we have to special revenues versus to the general fund. But when you're relying on special revenues like the TEF, you have to wait until collections come in. It used to be that DOA would front us a portion of those funds, but in recent years, I would say over the past 3 or 4 years, that DOA has said, let's wait until those funds come in before we release the cash as their way of improving management of cash. So that means waiting until the February and I believe April due dates for that cash to come in, and then for us to be able to catch up on that payable. So as we're catching up, as we get to the end of the fiscal year and there's all of a sudden another budget shortfall or a cash shortfall, those impact our ability to catch up with those vendors. So that's a repeated cycle that we've been in. And this year, especially with the delay in the property tax deadlines and the delay of course, in income tax, that's something that we are monitoring just to make sure that the cash is coming in. And we're working with our vendors to make sure that they, we get on a plan with them to ensure that they have what they need to continue to do business with us.
Yeah, I understand that, Mr. Superintendent, but this is an opportune time now that you received an extra $41.5 million from the federal government to reconcile this and shift the money around, which you have the authority to do, to pay off these 90 and over vendors. So
No,
if
I disagree with your understanding of the federal funds, if that's the case, because these funds are dedicated to COVID-19 response
I
and to the.
understand, but you're also using it for curriculum and education, so you can move this money around. Right?
Correct, but most of our curriculum and instructional supports already come from the federal funds. So what we're talking about, payroll, vendor payments like food services, utilities, solid waste. If you look at the major dollar amounts, those are the vendors we're talking about. It's not necessarily the curriculum and instructional vendors. So when it comes to paying down your basic expenses, that's really the challenge. Otherwise, that wouldn't be an issue if we were able to use federal funds to cover those
Right, but
amounts.
the legislature still appropriates money for curriculum and instruction, not just for your salaries and operations. But
To
anyway,
be, if I could, Madam Chair, just for the record, as we've explained in numerous budget issues, those funds that we get from the legislature do go to funding, for the large part, personnel on our major contracts, which include utilities and so forth, and which is why we come to you with a much larger budget request than we're able to achieve. And most of those funds, most of that request can't be funded. So as I've testified before the legislature several times, it goes to our basic expenses, and we're very thankful for the federal funds to be able to supplement what we can provide in the curriculum and instructional side. But that's just our
so
normal
I
budget.
think that maybe that the EFSC still probably might have some kind of position to hold until we get off this third party, perhaps. Maybe that's something we can discuss. I mean,
If I could
this was
correct
a surprise to me that to hear that you come on board and the vice chair for an adamant removal, repealing the whole law of the Education Financial Supervisory Committee. The real intent of being here today was to discuss the 90 and over vendor payments, because we've been getting a lot of calls from the stakeholders, and especially because of the school closures that we had to do. The utilities, the impact that maybe the cost savings that we could have examined from the utilities that were not being utilized during this time, and for whatever cost savings that continued the operations within the school itself. And so, we did find ways to continue to pay the limited term and also those that are on salary for the operations, but just to see if there was any cost saving measure, because schools closed for several months, and how if we were utilizing those cost savings to go back into redirecting for whatever the needs for that would directly impact the teachers and the students at GDOE.
So if I could, the EFSC, I believe, received some of this information, or at least in this discussion, but if not, what I wanted to be able to present as well is that at this point, we can report cost savings due to the COVID-19 pandemic, at least to the end of June, of around $1.4 million. And this is attributed to the savings from GPA, GWA, and then some of the reduction in some of our contractual services that weren't required during the shutdown. So there's about 1.4 million that we're tracking in savings. Now, obviously, it's not really a savings until we get to the end of the year and see where we are with other areas of expense. Due to COVID-19, there are expenses that have been related to COVID-19. We're tracking an amount of about 5.9 million. Now, this includes, now let me just clarify what that 5.9 million is. It's basically reflecting all the costs associated with the COVID-19 response, as well as, which does cover things like the COVID-19 pay for frontliners and differential, the grab and go meals that we're doing instead of through the normal cafeteria, custodial services that were needed to deep clean and disinfect schools, as well as purchase orders for some of the health and safety supplies, computer supplies, and office supplies for the distance learning. So the reason I'm capturing that as a $5.9 million total is because this is the amount that we are also going to FEMA for potential reimbursement. So What you'll be interested in knowing is that if we are able to receive some of that reimbursement, then that will go to the relief of our budget. And so
Mhm.
that's something we're hoping to hear response from, hopefully over the next, couple of weeks. But that is something that would definitely give us some relief on the local side to replenish those funds that were spent out of our budget, specifically for COVID-19 response.
Yes, so the government received almost $1 billion for COVID-19 through the CARES Act, and a lot of the money was a good piece of the money is being utilized for payroll. And so I think that this is something that you can avail to, so you can start chopping off this $5.9 million deficit. And if you're talking about custodial services and distance learning and all the Wi-Fi requirements that you are tracking, maybe perhaps you can look at that $41.5 million that was given to USDOE for those things. So that it's very difficult if you continue to add up this debt and then you're still receiving money, but you're holding the taxpayer accountable for this debt, some of the money that can cancel out from the federal government because of COVID. And if you can't directly utilize that money for those expenses, then I think it's something, I don't think you need to prove to us that this money here that's being given that says that you could use it, that we're under the understanding that it can be used for these purposes, that it cannot be used. And so this is the first time this is coming up, this $5.9 million debt that you are,
it's not actually, it's a cost. So
okay,
what I'm
$5.9 million cost because
I want to
the vendors. Let me finish, Mr. Superintendent, please. So if you can prove to us, the legislature, that this $5.9 million cost, with all the money being 41.5 being dropped into DOE for other services and other schools, and then the almost $1 billion from the CARES Act that DOE cannot avail to this money, if that can be proven to us, then absolutely, then yes, we can talk about this additional $5.9 million cost. But that's not my impression. But if I'm wrong, I'd like you to please provide to me and the EFSC the documentation so that we can examine this.
So if I could clarify, because I think it's getting a little bit muddy. As I mentioned before, based on our expenditures from a year prior to today, we're tracking a $1.4 million savings of what we would usually spend for these services and the utilities over this period of time. And we hope that those reductions remain in place, as we close out the fiscal year. We did expend funds of about $5.9 million in response to COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And again, some of those are covering the salaries of employees who were just redirected to response. And that $5.9 million is a cost that came out of our budget. It's not a debt. We actually paid that out. But we're hoping for reimbursement from FEMA. And so we actually have an active project application being reviewed by FEMA that would provide that reimbursement to us. And if that $5.9 million reimbursement is given to us, then that does go to the benefit of the department in being able to address some of these other cost issues, including vendor payables. That would be a reimbursement of local funds. So with regard to the 41.5, that is of course subject to the approval of USDOE and the application that we put forth to support all the things that we've come and talked to you about already. So these are all moving parts. So I just want to make sure that the 5.9 is actually seen as a good thing if it does happen. It's not a debt, it's just a reimbursement of costs that if we do get that reimbursement, then it will definitely help us to address some of these issues, especially with the vendors who we know are definitely worried about making it through this pandemic. And so we will let you know as when we hear a decision. That will be good news for the department.
Right. And so what I'm saying is that the part of the $5.9 million in cost can be covered by the close to $1 billion amount through the CARES Act that was given to Guam. And so, however you want to approach the problem, or with that solution, if you want to hold this $5.9 million cost and try to bank on getting a FEMA reimbursement when the money is right here on island for DOE to avail to, then of course, yes, that's your prerogative as a superintendent. But what I'm concerned about is that you come back to the legislature and say, we got this $5.9 million cost. FEMA only gave us $3 million, so we need additional 2.9. That's what I'm concerned about. And then we have to go, we go on your word of how you approach the situation. And so I'm asking now at this time, if you can provide the documentation to this office and to the Education Financial Supervisory Commission so that they can dissect this $5.9 million in cost, and also provide the documentation that shows that you cannot avail to the $1 billion or the close to $1 billion amount that CARES Act gave to government of Guam, and also how you cannot use the $41.5 million, not unless you already used it for something else. But if there's something that limits you from doing it, then that's what we want to see.
Right. We will keep you abreast of that issue, and I will work with the chair of the EFSC to facilitate any requests for information to the EFSC as well, and they can let me know what documents are required.
Okay, I'm asking you right now to send it. If I need to do a FOIA to the Guam Department of Education, please don't let me do that.
No, absolutely, it's public information. I just want to make sure we are clear on exactly what the EFSC requests as an external body, and we will respond to them as needed with whatever they seek to review.
Okay, and now to discuss the vendor pay. Yes, Ms. Sanchez.
So I just wanted to point out, at the last meeting, we were told that they actually received federal money for the grab-and-go meals that was provided under the CARES or under some different, I forget what they called it. They did tell us what it was, but they received I think 1 million something to pay for that. And then the frontliners, my issue is these frontliners were assigned to quarantine work, which is under the Department of Public Health, and they had specialized money that was allocated to pay these frontliners. So I'm just concerned that there's a duplicate amount of money that's in this 5.9 million that really is supposed to come out of two different, like I said, we were just told by the deputy finance Assumption that that grab and go was being paid. She gave us a number too. And then the frontliners, again, I'm concerned because my understanding is anyone assigned to quarantine work was being paid with an MOU through the Department of Public Health under the federal money. That's just what I wanted to know.
May I respond to just a request for information?
Yeah, yes,
Okay, yeah, you're absolutely right that there is federal money provided from the governor's share of their CARES Act, where they did provide us $1 million to address the local match to extend the grab-and-go meals through the summer. So that is true. $1 million came in to cover the local share. We do also get federal dollars from USDA from the school breakfast and lunch program, which is the federal share, but there is still a local share for the amount from March 15th through the end of June that had to come out of the local funds. So that's the amount. So absolutely true. I don't know that you have the full picture, but I assume someone on the EFSC would also know that, because these are also the other government agencies controlling the other funds. And then with regard to the personnel, the GDOE has paid the full cost. If you're suggesting that be requested from the governor's office, we did request, and we are working with them and FEMA to reimburse the full cost, not just the differential, but the full labor cost for those employees. So those employees have been paid, but we're seeking reimbursement and working with the governor's office on that. So that's just to clarify those 2 points.
So why didn't they pay the complete salary of the individual and why did they only pay the differential? Why couldn't they just pay the complete salary for the individual?
No, we paid the full amount and the differential and have come back to the governor for the reimbursement for those amounts. And so working with the
differential,
I guess that's a source of funding that FEMA has indicated that they can cover. So we're following that guidance and working directly with the governor's office and FEMA for those costs to be reimbursed to the department.
But what about the payroll expenses from the CARES Act? GDOE did not request for any of that money, especially when you put the frontliners out there?
Yeah, so
you can't have it.
Yeah, so what we got directly from the CARES Act was $1 million for the food services extension, And then again, we didn't get the amounts for the personnel costs from the CARES fund, but we are working with the governor's office and FEMA for those amounts.
Yeah, I understand, Mr. Superintendent, you keep on saying FEMA, but I'm telling you that the CARES Act should have given DOE the money for this kind of response, for the salary, for the payroll.
If
So
you're
FEMA is a different entity, that's a different reimbursement. I understand that.
If you're referring to the governor's fund, then yes, we did, we're working with the governor, but we only control our GDOE funds, which we are the 41.5 for all public and non-public schools.
Right. So they took your nurses, they tasked them out to DPHSS, and they didn't pay for that payroll. DOE had to cover it.
At that point, yes, and we're working for reimbursement through other means.
Okay. So maybe we should go to the governor and tell her to give us the remaining, since I'd hate to see DOE come back and say FEMA only gave us 3.9 million, we need another 2 million, when we haven't had any revenue, any consistent revenue stream. And I'm worried about next year. And so if we can get the money now, because this is supposed to be used for payroll expense, there's nothing wrong with applying the pressure, saying, hey, Guam Department of Education stood up, served the community in the most dire times. They should be, given this kind of payment for the teachers or the staff that went out and serviced the community during the pandemic. I don't know what is trivial about that. and that's my concern, is that they're going to be overlooked.
Yeah, we're on the same, that whatever revenue source it is, I get your point now. I mean, I guess whatever revenue source it is, reimbursement would be important for us, and that would give us some relief on our budget. So, we're happy to raise, that discussion with the governor's office if there is funds remaining. But at this point, the discussion is focused on FEMA support and expediting that support. So any revenue, whatever the revenue source, we would appreciate, of course, that reimbursement.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Vince, hi.
Ma'am, you asked me to hold, and I did hold, and you.
Oh, sorry, Mark. You want to go first? No problem.
Ms. Henkel, you remember you asked me to hold?
Mr. Vice Chair, yes.
Yeah, I was.
There's a lot of people here.
Yeah, I know, but when you asked me to hold, I was going to respond to the previous speaker,
okay, go ahead.
the parent rep Sanchez. There were some comments made about the board overlapping its authority. And, I just want to point at Section C of 17 GCA, which basically gives the board to adopt an annual budget and control expenditures accordingly, and to review public periodic financial reports and modify the budget if and when necessary. So you're saying that the board is not authorized to do what the EFC is doing or what they're claiming to do. I think there's a conflict there, and that needs to be raised, that needs to be addressed. Because if that's the case, the EFC recommendations comes to the board for approval and gives us an opportunity to be aware of the situation. In addition to that, we're not like any other government agency. You got to remember, we have to abide by the 14 points. That's in law. So yes, they give us a lump sum appropriation, but that's all categorized based on the 14 points. And we go through that budget process. We go through the oversight hearing, we go to the budget process, and the money is allotted into the different categories that the board has approved and has justified before the legislature. Unfortunately, of course, we understand that the resources are not coming in, and we live within the means of the department, and we adjust accordingly. And so obviously, in the past couple of board meetings, we've been addressing these issues of payables. It's been very public. We've asked for, the board has asked the superintendent as well as the management to provide us a spending plan based on the cash flow that's coming in, because we understand that we're coming towards the end of the fiscal year and things will change. So those are the things that were, that's why I raised that issue. We got this oversight, and of course the legislature at any time can call us in. But yes, the board does have the responsibility to look at the budget, and that's what we're mandated to do. And so approval of contracts and all that other stuff is, within the purview, because we have to adjust accordingly based on the financial condition. And it's really the special funds that puts us in this predicament. And we mentioned the Territorial Education Facilities Fund. That's a big one for us. And so Yeah, thank you for the opportunity just to address that. But that's the way I read it. Unless it's clearly defined and separated, or the duties clearly defined, then absolutely. But at this point, I appreciate the conversation that's going on. So I just wanted to make that point. Sorry it wasn't earlier, but I know we're going into the CARES Act and all the other stuff. But I just want to put that for the record, that we're not like any other government agency. We can't generate our revenue. We got 14 points that we have to abide by. And it's just not, here's the lump sum money and here you spend it in this area. We give the spending priorities to the superintendent. And so that's the board's responsibility and duties. And then we monitor him and ensure that the spending priorities. And yes, we've been watching the accumulated payables that has been come over. And these things have been before the CARES Act. And so these are contracts that are trash collection, the larger ones. But I agree with you. We've asked the superintendent consider paying the small bills as much as possible, and then make the payment plans to pay off these the larger vendors as we're struggling for cash. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Vince, and then Mrs. Ascension, I'll call you after. Thank you for your patience. Vince, did you have something to say?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Vince Duenas. I work for the Office of Public Accountability. I'm actually representing Public Auditor Benjamin Cruz. Yeah, sorry, he's unable to make it today. He actually had another meeting at 2 o'clock with the big audit, so he's trying to get that out. But as you know, as I look into the room that of everyone that's in here, I think I'm the only one that's been here since the beginning with the EFSC. I remember that we used to, as part of the whole, I think we started this whole thing in 2010, way back then. I remember us fighting for trying to get office space or space to even hold our meetings. And at that time, we were holding it at the Manuel Guerrero building. We're holding it at BBMR. We're holding it here in our office. So I kind of seen the evolution of the EFSC over the whole years. I did leave the OPA in 2013, but while I left, I still served on the EFSC as a parent rep. And then when I came back to the OPA in 2017, I was reassigned to attend. What I wanted to say, Senator, and I want to thank you also, Vice Speaker, for hosting this. Before you go into the other issues, I wanted to talk about the public auditor's role, or the Office of Public Accountability's role in the EFSC. I want to make sure that it's expressed the sentiment of our involvement. We just wanted to bring to your attention that the public auditor, and he has made it publicly known last year in June of 2019 in one of our EFSC meetings that he attended, the desire to be taken off of the EFSC. The EFSC, through 17 GCA subsection 3133C, it lists 13 different duties and responsibilities. And before we went into the other two items, I thought we were going to unpack all of the 13 responsibilities individually. But for the purposes of the Public Auditor's Office, if we were to participate in carrying out any of some of the duties and responsibilities, then it kind of goes into the territory of doing management and the Board of Education's responsibilities, and it impairs our office's ability to conduct performance audits on the commission if they were ever to be necessary. I'm just going to give you two examples. One example is item 4 of the scope of authority, which allows the EFSC to review and approve a fiscal year 12-month human resources management plan. That's one of the 13 items that are that grants the EFSC their authority. From our past involvement in the EFSC, and like I said, I've been here part of this EFSC for the better part of the whole 10 years that it's been in existence. I can confirm that has not been done. The review and approval of a fiscal year 12-month human resources plan. However, if the EFSC did review and approve that plan, and the OPA participated, that would severely impair us in conducting any audit on all human resources issues because of our involvement and us approving, because it delves into management's responsibilities. Another example is another point dealing with reviewing and approving all contracts and expenditures in excess of $1 million prior to the issuance of purchase orders and bid awards to verify fund expenditures and how they conform to the section of the law. Yeah, that's a very big impairment for us if the OPA, and I'm only speaking on OPA's behalf, not on BBMR or DOA. This is just specifically for the OPA. If we reviewed and approved $1 million contract, you might as well just take OPA out of the picture in doing any procurement appeals, because that's one of our main responsibilities here in the office. So there are 13 points that we can go over. I do know for a fact that we are meeting at least two of the points that's dealing with the designation of the statuses for, and we submit it to the board for their review. Actually, we approve it and then we send it to the board. Having said that, if you wanted, I guess we wanted to put it on the record, and we have put it on the record, or the public auditor has in the past, that whatever you decide with the EFSC, you want to keep it or whatever you want to do with it, the express sentiment from the OPA is to please consider taking us off. That's all I had to say with that. Thank you.
So Vince, I get it, the conflict of interest and everything, but who would you recommend to replace the OPA?
Well, frankly, I don't think the OPA should be part of the EFSC.
I understand.
We still manage our oversight responsibility. I'm sorry, right?
You have a recommendation?
Not just take OPA off, but I think the group that's already there, they each probably have something to say about their involvement. I'll leave it to them to speak on their behalf. But as far as we're concerned, I don't think we don't have any or should not have any role in the EFSC. I don't know who you want to pick. That's up to the legislature if you wanted to replace us with somebody. But
well, if you haven't been performing the functions for the past 10 years, then there's no reason to remove the OPA if it's up to the legislature to pick.
Well,
and if the EFSC has been performing 2 of the scope of authority, duties, and responsibilities granted in 17 GCA Chapter 3, they're only performing 2 out of the 13, then
so
maybe argument would be moot, but don't just say, oh, it's up to the legislature to decide whether they want to remove the OPA or not.
No, actually, for 2 of those responsibilities, I did it. We looked at it and we felt it did not impair us from doing any potential audits. So we looked at all the 13 points, and it's wherever it says review and approve, that's where we kind of like can't do that.
Well, it hasn't been done anyway.
And it has not been done anyway, yeah. So I know there's discussion, the vice chair and also the superintendent have also expressed in their testimony earlier I guess the potential to repeal the EFSC. That's where I'm saying it's up to the legislature if they're going to do that. But like I said, it is the public auditor's sentiment that we want to be taken off.
Sure. That's very good to know. So it does say that we have an issue with EFSC actually performing the functions, and Ms. Sanchez did say that they have not been able to receive any of the review and approve all contracts and expenditures. And according to Mr. Duenas, there has only been 2 out of the 13 items being actually performed in scope of authority for the EFSC. So for me, it doesn't seem like there's an issue of the EFSC existing. The issue is that the EFSC is not doing its full job as in accordance with the law. And so I know we have a 3:30 to go into with GDOE. Mrs. Ascension, you wanted to say something. I will tell you right now that until we get off third party, or if USDOE writes me a letter saying EFSC is to be removed, then I will support a law to repeal it. But as of this time, we are still in third-party fiduciary, and I'm finding out now that the EFSC has not been performing its functions, so maybe we need to revisit the law and see how we can push people to actually perform their function within the scope of their job. Mrs. Ascension, yes?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity. It's just probably 5 to 6 minutes blur, and I want to properly introduce myself, where I came from. I was the Chief Financial Officer of the University of Guam for the last 12 years before I took on this responsibility. About 6 months ago. So I'm the newbie at the Department of Education. So when I was looking at the finances of the department, the first thing I looked at was the cash sustainability, and what do they have in terms of payables, and what is it that they're not getting from the DOA or the part for allotment, etc. So I looked at it and studied their audit report as well. And their audit report for fiscal year 2019, they are, we were on the red of about the fund balance of $1.5 million negative. So then I looked through the history of how they were being paid, and I know that they were shorted about $2 million in 2019. So I was looking at the payable, and there's over $2 million as of, I think when I took over, as of January. So I said they have 2019 payables and they have 2020 accumulating of 2020. So it's just like robbing Peter to pay Paul. But for my, I see these vendors as first in, first out, and I need to recognize the fact that they are owed money, 2019 people. So I made that as the first priority to pay them off. So then with the bigger vendors that have that can sustain themselves with cash, I made the step to talk to them, even call them for those people that are off island, to see if I can arrange the payment plan with them. And bigger people, bigger cash, they have the ability to say yes to me if I negotiate the payment plan. So that has been the case for us. So bigger ticketed items like Sodexo, they were able to give us a payment plan which is reasonable for us in terms of what we get from the Department of Administration. And other local vendors like JRN, that we owe a bit of money, and they came into us and say, yes, Ms. Zenny, we are able to do that, but just give it to us on a regular basis. This is a commitment for you that you need to make good for us, and we're going to go ahead and approve that, and we'll go forward. So then there's also a misnomer in the reading of the, I shouldn't say misnomer, but a mistake in reading the aging report, because the aging report is like a living document, Madam Chair. It changes every day, it changes. So the $8 million that you are looking at as of June 30, it's based on cutoff. So that it depends on the vendor invoices that come in during that time of June 30. And I can say that I pulled up this most recent invoice aging report from our accountant. He's actually here right now, Justin Castro. We are about $6.1 million, Madam Chair. And of that $6.1 million, we only have about 1.9 million of 90 days, over 90 days. So for the most part, we have current and 30 to 60 days. At one point in time, I know Ms. Carol has highlighted the fact that we're not paying Sodexo, but it was at that cutoff that we have not paid anything yet. But as of today, we have paid about, just recently, 1.4 million in EFT and 400,000. So it's about close to $2 million that we paid off Sodexo. So right now, Sodexo is a little bit over, actually it's 1,488,000. So it changes. That's my statement. It changes every now and then. And the things that we need to look out for in terms of priority and payments is, of course, like every government agency, is the utilities. GPA is unrelenting. I just have to tell you that. If they say they're going to cut off tomorrow, and then we better pay them before 5 o'clock today, And the other things that we were concerned of is making sure that the sanitation and those grass cutting, deep cleaning are paid for, because they're not big vendors. Even though they're not 90 days yet, I have to pay them because they're just 5 or 6 employees that they work on a 24/7 kind of thing. So I make them a priority as well. So I just want to share that with you, and not be concerned too much about what's the bottom line of an aging report, because it changes every now and then. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mrs. Asuncion. And yes, I am worried because it's, we're dealing with the situation now that's going to impact us in the next year and for the next 2 years. And so really it's to understand, to get a handle on these things and And, you know, I don't know at the next budget cycle that people are going to have to cut, and where are we going to cut from? And so that's why I'm concerned about this $5.9 million cost. Why DOE is not getting a cut from from the CARES Act, from the close to $1 billion that was given to the government. And then the 41.5, how can DOE utilize that money for some of the things that they're, you know, moving forward with the distance learning and curriculum cost and so forth. So that's my concern. I mean, today we can say, okay, everything is under control, but the impact is going to be seen the next fiscal year. And so I'm trying to see how we can plan ahead. And it's very disturbing for me to hear that the EFSC, you know, this is the first time we're having this roundtable discussion. And this is the first time that I'm hearing that the superintendent doesn't want to be in EFSC. The board wants, you know, to be out of the EFSC. The OPA wants to be out of EFSC. Like, you know, like, where's all this coming from? This is just very new. And then EFSC hasn't been performing all of its duties within its scope. You know, this is a concern for us. It's like, well, what happened? Where was everyone the whole year? Or the whole 2 years?
I understand. And this is really an eye-opener for everybody else, what we lack and what we need to do going forward. I understand that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And thank you for your hard work. I know it's not easy dealing with the Guam Department of Education. I mean, you receive 1/3 of the budget. So thank you for all your hard work. I know it's very stressful. Thank you, Ms. Ascension. Yes, Frank?
Hi, Madam Chair. Frank Cooper, Nurse, Chief Auditor for GDOE. Sorry, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I'm coming through. Can you hear me, Madam Chair? Joy, I can't hear.
Sure, I can hear you. Go ahead. You're coming through.
Well, I just wanted to briefly comment. I believe our earlier speaker, our parent rep, Ms. Carol Hinkle Sanchez, commented that there's two different bodies with two separate and distinct functions. And as I trace through the law, I do agree that they're very different bodies, but I do believe that there's some overlapping functions. And I do recall our vice chair speaking specifically to those functions on the adopting an annual budget and the controlling the expenditures of our department. And then you also heard from our public auditor, like he said, he's been a part of this commission for a long time now. And he said two things, is one, the OPA should be removed from this function because of the 13 areas that the FSC has to do or should be established to do, and it has a management responsibility. So as we trace through this law, I do want to call to your attention that there is some functions that seem to be in conflict relative to the adoption and approval of an annual budget, making recommendations on policies and practices, even down to the hiring. And those collide directly with the board's functions and some of the superintendent's functions. Just like as our vice chair said, Carol was in the EFSC's functions. They are to make recommendations on policies and procedures related to our operating budget. And then from there, our board is supposed to adopt an annual budget and control expenditures accordingly. And then from there, the superintendent serves as the approving authority for all these expenditures of funds. So there's a trace that deserves discussion to go through these functions specifically and see how we can make sure that we clear this out and we iron out the specific authorities. And then lastly, as it relates to, I think I heard you comment that it's important to keep the EFSC around because of until we're released from the third-party fiduciary. And I just want to say that in my limited involvement with the EFSC, they're primarily focused on local funds. And the third party's scope of responsibility is only federal funds. So using the third party as a causation of
right. So USDOE will make that discernment whether the third party will be removed. USDOE, I've spoken with some of them, and their concern is not just the federal grants. Their concern is a bunch of other underlying things that, you know, I don't want to say for the record, but I'm sure that people are familiar with. So, and you're absolutely right. We don't have much time. So Frank, please forgive me for cutting you off, but we will go through this. Okay. We will go through the EFSC and its scope. And if we need to remove people, then we will remove them. So there's no conflict of interest in accordance with the law. The board, I do know that there are overlapping overlapping tasks between the board and the EFSC, but the board is supposed to support the superintendent in whatever the superintendent recommends. It's kind of like you cannot oppose him, you need to support him. Whether the EFSC is supposed to be a non-objective party. And so this is something that we need to iron out. This is the first time we're having this. We can recess and we can, bring this up at a later date, but I think that we also need to have some meetings to discuss this further, because this is something new where superintendent, you and I, we talk often, and this is the first time you've ever mentioned that you don't want to be a part of the EFC. So, maybe, we need to look at some other avenues before we just can say, okay, we're going to give you exactly what you're asking for. No, this is something big. We have to stop and take a moment to really discern and scrutinize this request. Okay. All right. So I'm just gonna. We have another meeting, and it's in a separate link. So I'm gonna cut us off right now, and we can schedule to meet at a later date, and then we can discuss this more. This law evolving. All right. It is now 15:23 in the afternoon. This roundtable hearing is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming. God bless.
Thank you.